Howdy guys, howdy guys. I know we're a couple seconds late, but don't fret, we're still here. So we're just gonna allow a little bit of extra, a little bit overlap, just so people can get in to the thing. But how is everybody going? You can use the chat in the bottom right hand corner to say anything, and we'll be able to see it. But I'll just give a brief introduction to the Livestorm platform if you've never used it before. So as I said, the chat's in the bottom right-hand corner. Next to there, you'll see questions, polls, and all the other things. They should be a little bit self-descriptive. So as we go through this webinar, we won't pause for every single question because that will just take too long. So if you do have any questions that arise at the time of where we are, just use the question tab, put your question there, and then when we have a Q&A at the very end, we'll run through those as many as we can in the time that we have left over. So firstly, I'll let it over to Milo so he can introduce himself, and then he'll pass back to me, hopefully.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Milo Schwartz. I'm one of the co-founders and co-developers of Pangolin. If you guys are Pangolin users, you probably see me all the time making releases or in Discord. So super thankful to the CrowdSec team for hosting this and excited to talk.
Awesome. So my name's Lawrence. I'm head of professional services here at CrowdSec. That means I just interact with users, interact with clients on a daily basis, getting to understand their issues with the cybersecurity landscape and how CrowdSec can be used to remediate those for you. Just a brief introduction of how I found out about Pangolin. There was a user called HHF. That many people may know in the community. And he was talking about Pangolin, and I was like, what the hell is going on? I was like, I don't have a clue what this is. I tried to Google it. I found out it was an animal, and I was completely Googling the wrong thing. Then when I found out what their aims were with CrowdSec, it sounded like obviously a really great interaction that we could have. So we're getting up to about 30 people here. So I think we can proceed with sharing our lovely slides. So give me 1 second. Let me just add these in.
I made sure to say yes. I love Pangolin and CrowdSec when I answered the poll.
Yeah. When it popped up, I was like, it kind of threw me off a little second. I was like, skip, and then another one just popped up, so I'll answer that one. But yeah, just a reminder, throughout this webinar, we're going to be throwing up some polls. So if you do have like 5 seconds just to answer them, it just helps us with learning your use case and learning how you use Pangolin or either CrowdSec or both of them together. So yeah, we wanted to host this webinar just to give an introduction to Pangolin and to CrowdSec, to obviously the two communities that may not be affiliated with each other. If you're from the Pangolin side, you may know what CrowdSec is because you're greeted with that inside the installation when you first install it. But to some users on the CrowdSec side, which may still be using a disjointed ecosystem, with their own auth provider or their own traffic instance, and they're not using such a cohesive product such as Pangolin. So this is why we wanted to do this webinar, to introduce those two communities together.
Fine.
So I just preface the conversation with what our goal is for CrowdSec, and then we'll jump into Milo's slides just to get a little bit of history on Pangolin and obviously how it works. So CrowdSec was first formed about 5 years ago, and the original creators of it used to work for a MSP or a hosting infrastructure, and they basically were hosting something for a large games that happens every couple of years, starts with Olympic, and they were basically defending their infrastructure, and they managed to basically block IPs, and they were like thinking, okay, well, we've got these IP addresses that we know are malicious, so how can we distribute this to other people so they can get the information? There was no cohesive system. Obviously, MISP existed, but there was still nothing saying, hey, these are the malicious IPs. These are 100% bad, and you should just inject them straight into your firewall. So this is where CrowdSec was born. They built the first, V0 of it for this system, and then they just kind of evolved and then released it as a standalone product. So basically, our mission is that cybersecurity is shared between all organizations. If everyone uses CrowdSec, then obviously the more visibility that we have, then the more we can be proactive for everybody that's inside the same ecosystem together. And now we can jump into the Pangolin slides.
Sure, yeah. So you're going to hear a lot from me about Pangolin and how it works, and then we'll kind of bring it back, I guess, and talk about the connection between the two, how Pangolin and CrowdSec interact and why it's a good pair. But I'll give you some history about Pangolin too. So at a high level, though, it's an open source identity and application-aware remote access platform. It's unlike CrowdSec, it's much younger. CrowdSec has been around for 5 years. For us, currently less than a year. We're coming up on a year here in January, which is going to be very exciting. We're also open source, and we have a lot of adoption in the home lab space as well as in the IT space, so kind of some similarities in the products there. I actually started Pangolin with my brother, Owen, also the co-founder and co-maintainer of the project. And we started because we were active in the home lab communities for a while, and there was a lot of discussion, kind of as Lawrence mentioned in the beginning, of people gluing together these disjointed components for WireGuard tunnels and Nginx proxies and OAuth 2 proxies, and we figured there's an easy way to package this all together and provide a nice cohesive product to everyone. So we launched it in January. It's kind of taken off since, and we're at about 16,000 GitHub stars at the moment. Yeah. All right, so there's kind of two sides to Pangolin. There's a public side and a private side. The public side is more like an identity-aware reverse proxy on steroids that can span multiple networks through tunnels. And the private side is more similar to a VPN. It's closer to Tailscale, where you can access resources on a private network without public exposure. That side is a little bit more immature at the moment. So I'm going to focus more on the public side, also because it's more similar to, or it makes more sense to pair with CrowdSec due to the fact that CrowdSec can block public IP access. A couple more things on that previous slide. Sorry, Lawrence.
I'm too eager, sorry.
Yeah, so I just wanted to also throw in. So we use Traffic as the underlying reverse proxy for the public side. And Traffic has a middleware system, so made it very easy for us to integrate CrowdSec, but you can also integrate many other plugins like Fail2Ban or anything else that is on the security side that you need to beef up your security. We also use a plugin ourselves to handle authentication, and I'll get more into that later on. And then CrowdSec comes in for the auto installer when you bring up the stack, it'll ask you if you want to install CrowdSec, and it automatically inserts that bouncer for you, as well as installs the CrowdSec engine on your VPS. Yeah, that's the high level. Cool. All right, so so how does Pangolin work? There's kind of 3 steps to the process. You deploy it, so you deploy the Pangolin server side. Then you connect one or more remote sites. These are the tunnels. So for those of you that are familiar with the ecosystem, we name everything based on animals. So the tunneling client is called Newt, which is a small lizard-like salamander animal. Obviously, Pangolin is closer to an armadillo. So then the last step is you define resources, and that gets into the fact that Pangolin is deny all by default. You have to define a resource before it's available. And then you also set access controls on those resources. So things like, oh, only this user can access this resource, or only this group, or only people from a certain country can access a resource. And then the Pangolin installation is very easy. So there's an automated installer that you can throw up to, it'll walk you through a couple questions, and then by the end you'll have a running instance. But the prerequisites generally are you need a VPS server or any server really that has a public IP address and the ability to open up ports. For many, this is a VPS, just because a lot of our users are behind restricted firewalls, or maybe they don't have a static IP address. And then when it brings up the server, there's 3 main subcomponents. There's Traffic, the reverse proxy, there's Gerbil, which is a tunnel manager, also named after an animal. And then there's Pangolin itself, which is like the business logic component and APIs and UI and all that. And then you just need to open up some ports. So 80 and 443 for web traffic, and then 51280 for WireGuard traffic. And then, of course, you need a domain name. So you can see in the diagram here, this is kind of demonstrating the different parts. So there's the, there's the central Pangolin server. User's request hits that first, and then there's these downstream remote networks, and those could be your home network, it could be an office, it could be a VPC, virtual private cloud, on a cloud provider like Amazon.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in that the one thing that I find Pangolin does quite well is to create the cohesion between that. You have Pangolin, which is your VPS or wherever you deploy it. You then have your sites, which are then connected to your resources. So it's quite easy for a user to understand that, you have to connect all the dots especially when you had this broken ecosystem beforehand, that you didn't know which was connected to which, and it's quite hard for some people who don't have the networking background to then understand how the traffic flows between all of these sort of components.
Exactly. Yeah. We try to abstract the networking out, so you don't have to think about that as much. You can just think about things on a low level of just applications and identities, and then everything else is handled by Pangolin itself. Alrighty. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about Newt. Newt is very important because it's the tunneling client. It does a lot of different steps, and this part is going to get a little bit more technical, but it's not a part that we talk about often with Pangolin. But for those of you that want to understand the inner workings of it, I think it's cool to understand. But Newt is part of step 2 from that last slide. It's where you set up those remote sites, and it's effectively a connector to a different network. So Newt goes on a network, and you can connect to anything that it can see on that network. So if it's addressable from the point of view of Newt, then you're good to go. It contains 3 major components. It's a WireGuard peer, so it contains WireGuard code. It's also a TCP, a raw TCP UDP proxy, and it's also a WebSocket. And all these things are smashed together into one Go binary. It's written in Go, but it can also run as a Docker container if that's how you want to deploy it. And it runs fully in user space, so you don't need higher level permissions in order to run this, which is really nice to have. So what are these 3 components useful for? So obviously the WireGuard tunnel, I'll start with the WebSocket. So the WebSocket is there for authentication. So when you start up Newt, you provide it with an ID and a secret token, and then you give it an endpoint, and the endpoint's the server URL. So when it connects, it establishes that WebSocket, and then it makes sure that you're fully authenticated to make sure that those credentials are still valid, they haven't been rotated or expired or something like that. And then the WebSocket is also used for control messages. So like maybe there's a new application you add, we push that information down the WebSocket and tell Newt to establish that new connection. And then the WireGuard peer. So this one is very important for obvious reasons. So it's the part that actually tunnels traffic to and from the Pangolin server. And that also breaks through the firewall. It's an outbound only tunnel. So you don't need ports open on the network running Newt because there's a port open on the server itself. So that creates that connection. And then lastly, there's a TCP UDP proxy. And oftentimes this gets swept under the rug. People don't talk about this, but it's very important because what happens is when you type in a target for a resource or application in Pangolin, you use the IP address or host name of the target running on the network itself. So the familiar address, like if you're on a home network, oftentimes that's 192.168.1 dot whatever. And the proxy is there to take the incoming traffic that's hitting the WireGuard peer. This is, by the way, the diagram on the bottom left. It hits the WireGuard peer address, which is like a 100.90.128 usually. And then it's translated from a port to that downstream address. So it's proxied out of Newt. And this means that, again, anything that Newt can see itself can be a resource in Pangolin because as long as it's able to proxy it out to that other application. And this is important because it's a different. A lot of people sometimes think Pangolin is very similar to Tailscale. There's a lot of differences, but this is one of them. With Tailscale, you have to run a peer on every single device, and you're creating this giant overlay network. With Pangolin, you're thinking about more like different networks that you're connecting based on the newts you install, and then you're addressing things on the other end of newt. So you don't need, if you have 5 EC2s and a VPC, you don't need to install Pangolin on every single EC2. You would just put one in the VPC, and then it can talk to everything. It also does a couple other important things. I'll list here, like newt can do health checking, so it can health check those downstream targets to make sure they're healthy. It would remove those targets out of rotation if they're unhealthy. So you could do things like failover or round robin. Load balancing, you can not only load balance between resources on the same physical site, but you could load balance between resources on completely different sites because as far as Pangolin is aware, all of these networks are being linked together, and you could create a resource with an API on Google Cloud and then an API on Amazon and completely load balance between the two. Next slide. Thank you. Cool. So this is I think a really important diagram to show the flow of traffic, and this is where we'll start kind of maybe seeing more of the benefit of where CrowdSec comes in. But a request, I guess you can think of Pangolin kind of like a front door, or at least for the public ingress side, it's like a front door where all requests hit this doorway, and if you're not allowed through, you're bounced off. And then if you are allowed through, then it makes its way down the right tunnel to that remote network. So the user would, or the request would originate from the user's browser. So that's the far left. And then DNS would resolve the fully qualified domain name to the IP address of the Pangolin server. So let's just imagine this is running on a VPS, so like maybe a Hetzner instance. And then traffic, that request would hit traffic with an AE, as in the reverse proxy, on the VPS itself. Traffic would then, it would go through traffic's middleware stack. So we have a middleware that runs in traffic called Badger, and that does the authentication to say, based on the rules you've set in Pangolin, this user should or shouldn't have access. This is where you would also be running CrowdSec Bouncer, and we'll get into that a little bit further. You'll see this diagram again, but that would run here as well. And then if the packets are allowed based on these rules, traffic will route them to the WireGuard peer associated with that target. And then, sorry a second. So route them down the peer to that associated target. Newt would then identify which target it's associated with by the source port, and then proxy it out to the downstream target. So like, that's basically it. So it's the browser to the Pangolin server. Pangolin server allows it, hits Newt, and then Newt then sends it out of the tunnel to your NAS or your container, whatever the downstream target may be. And what this means is that all unwanted traffic never makes its way down the tunnel to your network. It always bounces off of the VPS itself. And I guess one thing I forgot to mention in the introduction is we obviously advertise Pangolin. Oftentimes you'll see this as like an alternative to Cloudflare tunnels. So Cloudflare works in a similar way in that requests hit the Cloudflare edge network, and then based on the rules you define on CrowdSec's network, or excuse me, Cloudflare's network, the request never makes it down to whatever is being behind the Cloudflare proxy. So Pangolin as a component does parts of that. It does kind of the basic networking, the rules, the tunneling, all of that. CrowdSec will come in later as kind of like this, like for adding some of the cybersecurity components for DDoS mitigation, IP blocklists, etc.
Yeah, and when we talk about, let's say, if you were having a disjointed setup, not to say it is disjointed, but it can work in cohesion when you think about it. But like with Pangolin, you obviously have double reverse proxies on both sides of the network, which you need anyways when you're using like a tunnel between the clients. The great thing is about Newt is that it's automatically able to reach out to Pangolin to be the source of truth for the configurations. So you don't have to think, oh, wait, I need to set up traffic to handle this certificate, and then I need to go then tell, Nginx down the road that it also needs to look for this kind of thing. Just an example, if you were to use traffic down to Nginx on the end of the peer. So that's where like Pangolin does make sense when it comes to this cohesion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can. It's like a unification. Like a lot of people will have a reverse proxy on, maybe all your different networks, and you have to have different configs on each one. Pangolin is like a nice way to centralize ingress for all those different locations. All right, so yeah, moving on to what the dashboard like interface looks like. So I think this was very important in our success early on, having a nice like dashboard, because what we're doing here isn't like crazy novel. I mean, it's networking concepts that have been around for years, but we packaged it up in a nice system where you can configure everything through YAML, or you can configure it through the dashboard, and it's very intuitive. So what you're seeing here is the sites page. So this is where you create those new tunnels. You can use like some examples here: a VPC, an edge device, like if you're doing edge computing for IoT, or Jeff's laptop. Maybe Jeff is running he's like running a local dev server, and he's running a Newt instance there for testing, etc. You can see like the Newt version, bandwidth. We don't have a live demo here, but on the next page, we'll just show like one other important part of the dashboard. So this is like the resources page where you can define those different applications. So like, looks like we have authentic, and maybe on that edge device, you're monitoring a battery, like for a UPS or a generator, and that generator has an admin interface. You could use Pangolin to tunnel that stuff out. Or you have Grafana deployed on a VPC. I know every time I've started a new AWS environment, the first things I always have to set up are, one, some kind of reverse proxy, so I can like get access to resources on that network, like Grafana. And then two, I always add a Bastion jump box, so I can like connect into EC2s and resources. So like Pangolin kind of combines both of those into one, where you can just drop it now in your different VPCs for development, and you're off to the races.
Yeah. Plus, also you also don't want to like expose them to the internet. So you would have a Bastion, but then if you're gonna have a Bastion, you're gonna have to set up all the users for the Bastion, and then if you got loads of like authentication, and you need multiple people to have those access, then obviously through Pangolin, it's just still the single source of truth. So you don't have to replicate the work and do it all over and over again.
Exactly, and and it can be, well, I guess I'll save that for later. But yeah, so this is the last like image of the screen. Actually, go back one moment. Sorry, I was just gonna say this is the last screenshot we have, but I can talk through just high level some of the components in the sidebar. Like you can see here, you can create users and roles and link those two together. We have an invitation system, so you can invite different users to your organization, because Pangolin is multi-tenant, so you can create different completely isolated groups of entities. There's also this concept of a shareable link, which is like a kind of like a magic link you can send someone, like if you're sharing a Google Doc, almost like that, or sharing like I don't know, what's another example? I can't think of one, but you give access temporarily to a resource that has like either it could never expire, or it could expire at a certain date, and then people who use that link would lose access. You can create API keys. Pangolin has a pretty robust API that you can use for automation to create tunnels or resources programmatically, if that's what you would like to do. And yeah, this is actually a slightly old version of the dashboard. You can see at the bottom it's 1.7, but we're at 1.12 now. So, but it looks largely the same. All right, so I think it's important to talk a little bit about the differences between Pangolin versus a VPN, and then on the next slide, there's Pangolin versus a reverse proxy. So the funny thing is Pangolin is kind of both at all times. It's like everything, and it's actually sometimes it's a problem to explain it to people, because it's like confusing. Oh, it's a reverse proxy, it's a VPN, and what, like what's happening here? But I'll try to break this down as much as possible. So for the public side of Pangolin, for public ingress, it's a little bit different than a VPN, in that a VPN gives you usually full network access to another network. So you have to install client-side software, like maybe on your phone or on your desktop or laptop. And then this is establishing a tunnel, and then all tunnels sent through the tunnel to whatever that other network is on the other side. So like with an older style VPN, this would be like a server client paradigm. In recent years, it's kind of shifted more towards mesh networks with stuff like Tailscale, Zero Tier, et cetera. Pangolin architecturally is not a mesh network. It's closer to the server client paradigm, where there's like different hubs, and then you have spokes coming off of those hubs. And then on the public side, Pangolin is more focused on ingress. So people can access resources publicly through a browser, or maybe even it's machine-to-machine access. So this is like piping, HTTP content through a fully qualified domain name with an SSL certificate. So if your grandma can't install client-side software, Pangolin could be really useful because you could tunnel traffic and she could just access it from a familiar browser with the username and password, or even log in with her Google account if you wanted to link an external identity provider. Last note on the VPN side is many VPNs are not denial by default. So when you set up a node, you're given access to everything on that machine, or maybe you're given access to even everything on that network. By default, when you install Newt, you're not exposing anything. You have to go to the Pangolin dashboard, to that resources page you saw earlier, and you have to create a resource to then tell Newt that, okay, this thing is now accessible by a specific person or a specific group of people. So that goes back to that like service or application and identity aware components kind of together. Sorry, next slide. Cool. So how is Pangolin different than a reverse proxy? So again, Pangolin is kind of a reverse proxy. It contains one, traffic, but we're adding a layer on top. So when I say reverse proxy here, I'm talking more of just like dropping Nginx on a network somewhere. And with something like that, it can only address things on the network on which it's installed. It's not identity and context aware, so you can't give someone a login to a resource unless you integrate some other system. Oftentimes, it's not highly available. So what happens if that Nginx server goes down? With Pangolin, you can run multiple different nodes at the server level and the exit level. So if the Pangolin server goes down, there's another ingress point. So and then also on the side of like the cross-networking thing, or cross-network access thing, you can have one central Pangolin proxy server, and then you can have 150 different networks across the entire globe and get access to things as if Nginx was running on each of those networks through these Newt tunnels. And then, so in that way, it's like fully unified. You don't have to think about things like natting access or certain resources. We kind of abstract a lot of that away. You really only, once you get that public server up with its public IP address, you don't have to think about the networking really on the remote sites at all. Basically, as long as it has internet access, Pangolin can expose it. So it's really useful in like edge environments in that way. Maybe you're behind you're on a cell network and you're behind CGNAT. You see a lot of people using Pangolin and the edge. All right. Yeah, so just some common use cases. I think this is like the last real Pangolin only slide, and then I'll shut up and give it over to to Lawrence to talk more about the CrowdSec integration. So some common use cases. So I've already mentioned a couple of these. So like, I think the common one for a lot of home labbers these days, and even businesses, is like there's a bunch of different internal tools. Maybe you've got like a CRM running at the office, and then you've got like Grafana and the VPC, and then I don't know, maybe at home you've got a Bitwarden like password manager client or something. Pangolin could expose all of these in one central place. You can use one login for all of them, and you don't have to worry about setting up reverse proxy and all these different networks. Another one is temporary sharing of resources for contractors or doing demos of certain things, like, I need to give this contractor who's servicing this generator access to the admin interface, but only for a couple days. So I'm going to give him a shareable link and now he can go through and remotely access that web page. And then jumping off of that point, also there's a lot of uses in edge and IoT. So that battery, it could be running in that generator could be running in like a power plant or like some manufacturer, like out in the field, like at a campsite. I don't know what it could be, but you would have then an edge device maybe next to that monitoring it with running Pangolin, and then that's the means to actually get it out to the internet. And that edge device might be behind CG-NAT, carrier grade NAT from a sub provider. So there's a hard firewall that Pangolin can punch through and now expose things. And then Pangolin can kind of solve this multi-cloud / on-prem unification. So if you're an MSP, oftentimes you're managing many different networks at once. You might even have some stuff installed on your own networks. So you could install Pangolin in the stack that goes on a client's network. You could also install it, or I guess Newt would go on the client's network. You could install Newt and Pangolin on your own network, and then now you don't have to go manage resources for all your different customers in 150 different places. You could isolate them in different organizations through the multi-tenancy system of this client's, in this org, this client's in this org, these are all their users, these are all their resources, etc. And then, yeah, that's kind of the last two, I guess. I didn't realize that I kind of duplicates there, but yeah, there's MSP access to customer environments is what I talked about, but also back to the on-prem thing. Some people, from a development standpoint, we have for Pangolin itself, we've got servers on different clouds, some on DigitalOcean, some on Amazon, some on GCP. These are all for our cloud platform, but we can use Pangolin to link that all up and be our bastion in, as well as a way to expose our internal dashboards that we have on each system. All right, so
Awesome.
I think the next slide is on to Lawrence to talk a little bit more about how where CrowdSec comes in.
Yeah, so I didn't manage to get the source files from Milo, so I kind of had to hack together the same thing, but it's not exactly the same thing, but it kind of looks close to it. Yeah, so this is just like a reflection of what Milo showed before. So basically the user browser's on the left, and then basically you throw the flow as it goes through. So you can see where the aspect of where CrowdSec comes in, we fit basically on the VPS network. Similar to what Milo said about, competitors, but Pangolin is in its own right, it's self-hostable. But basically with Cloudflare's network, you obviously have their edge, their compute, and their obviously security rules that they put onto their network. But this is where CrowdSec comes into its own, because it's your self-hosted security that's on your own edge network. So what is a security engine? So I will go into that a little bit more in the right, but it's just to give you a visual overview of, the request comes in, goes through the middlewares, and then gets sent down the tunnel stack. So what is the security engine, or how does it work? So basically this does a high level overview. So there's HTTP requests and your log sources. So when CrowdSec was first developed, it was meant to be a replacement for fail to ban. However, we've quickly found out that fail to ban happens, reading your log sources always happens after the request is finished. So what if they were going to do any damage, they would have done the damage, and they've already gone and left, stolen the loot, and they're already running off like little gremlins, and they're taking everything. So when we put HTTP requests in your log sources here, it's basically a WAF and an IDS IPS in one. That's what the security engine is. So it has a bunch of rules inside the system where it can take log lines in, it can take HTTP requests in. It basically sends them through the pipeline of checking them for malicious behaviors, and then it will basically trigger an alarm, is our marketing speak. But what it does is that it sends an alert, and then the alert can then be transformed into a decision. So you can say, hey, if somebody's seen doing a HTTP crawl to this API, I know it's a bad behavior because our APIs are only called on our mobile devices. So we know it's something definitely bad. Ban that IP address for 8 hours, for example. That request, that decision will then propagate through to your VPS. Will then go through to traffic / the middleware. And then the middleware will start enforcing it, saying, hey, this IP address is banned. Do not let it go further down through the train. However, there's a further side of CrowdSec, which is basically the networking side of it. So once an alarm or a trigger happens for you, you will share metadata around that signal. So I say metadata because everyone's, your data is your data. We don't want to take all your data because that's obviously not what we're here to do. But signal metadata is basically the IP address of who attacked you, the timestamp of when it happened, what scenario they were doing, and then some other contextualized data that if you opt in to send to us will be sent. And then basically our network will take that into account and then track trends and track things that are going on. And then on the other end, you get access to a community block list, which is 15,000 IPs of malicious intent that you will automatically start blocking as soon as you install it onto your VPS. The reason that we want to give you something back for your participation is that we don't want to be, stealing all your data and not giving you any benefit of joining the network because, what's the point in that? The whole point is to be a fair trade system, is that you give us access to this signal metadata, we give you access to this community block list, and then we all move ahead, hand in hand, holding hands together, skipping through the field where everything's burning around us of all the cybersecurity landscape. So where does the security engine get its parsers, scenarios, and WAF rules from? So we have a repository called CrowdSecurity/hub. Not that hub, a completely different hub. This is the one to do with rules. So what it is basically a GitHub repository where people can submit issues and also rules and that, and we take them into consideration and we do try to get them merged. Yes, there is a substantial amount of issues and open PRs on it, so we are working our way through them. So don't be dissuaded if we don't manage to get to your pull request in time, but we will get to that in the end. So what it does is that as soon as you open a pull request, we can merge your changes into the system. That then goes into a big index file that the engine has. And typically when you update your engine, it will go and update all the parser scenarios and WAF rules that you have assigned to there. It basically acts as like a central hub for people. So if you go to CrowdSecurity/hub, or if you go to hub.crowdsec.net, you'll be greeted with the page on the right-hand side. And if you've got an application in mind that you think, hey, CrowdSec is a great fit here, I'm seeing malicious activity on, XYZ application, and there doesn't seem to be any parser for it, type the name into that search box. If you see nothing there, then go onto the CrowdSecurity Hub repository, open an issue, and attach some example log lines with some private data redacted like the IP address, and then just we'll tag it with a good first issue. And then if anybody wants to come along and contribute to the ecosystem, then they can easily find easy like PRs that they can create for the system. So hub.crowdsec.net is basically just an alias for the console platform. So if you don't know what the console platform is, it's a way for you to enroll your engines into our dashboard. So the security engine itself does not have a self-hostable dashboard, just simply because we want to keep it lightweight as possible. We just want you to be able to deploy the security engine in multiple different ways, because you may have like a Kubernetes or container orchestration or salt stack, or something with automation, and you don't want to be accidentally exposing the dashboard everywhere across your infrastructure, because that's not what you want to do. So we have a platform that we host ourselves where you can enroll the engine in. You'll be able to visualize all your alerts that you get on your stack. And there's a few neat little features that you can see. So the image just at the bottom is called our new remediation metrics page. So the metrics are taken from the actual remediation component itself. The one that Pangolin uses, Traffic, does support this to some extent. It won't show you the breakdown of the different block lists that it basically sees the origin from, but it will tell you how many packets or how many requests it has blocked on those ones. So it's a good idea for you if you're a business or a user that wants to understand how effective CrowdSec is for yourself. You'll be able to get a good grasp on the value that we bring to yourself or your organization. And that's pretty much it for CrowdSec. I didn't want to go too technical in the weeds of like understanding the moving parts, because Pangolin, since it offers the installer, it pretty much scaffolds 99% of the things that you would want to do with Pangolin anyways. The other 1% is if you want to, let's say, do the firewall remediation or those other things. So what I'll go into ask, which I'm going to ask right now, is that if you have any of those certain things that you use Pangolin and CrowdSec with, and you're like, hey, I don't know how to achieve this one thing, we'd just ask you to put those in the questions on the tab on the bottom left, bottom right, actually. I don't know why it's the bottom left, but yeah, bottom right. And if we will consolidate those little things you want to do, and then we might come up with a post-webinar blog article that has all those answers to those questions, or something in the documentation on the CrowdSec side of how you can achieve those, and we'll make sure everyone has that information. And also, it wouldn't be this holiday time without some little discounts. So, yeah, we've running our first Black Friday sale, but we called it Block Friday sale. Little play on words. Trying to get a little marketing speak out here. So, if anybody wants to trial out the enterprise features of the console, you can get 60% off your first month subscription. Don't worry, you already get 7 days free trial as soon as you go to purchase anyway. So if you want to try the 7 days for free, then you can try the 7 days for free and then cancel. But if you want to continue it for Christmas and keep your protection up over Christmas, you get 60% off your first month. And then, feel free to cancel afterwards if you really wanted to. But that's just the offer that we're running at the moment for the Black Friday sale. And that's pretty much it. That's question and answers. So like I said, if you use the questions in the bottom right, it'd be way better than using the chat, because the chat's just going to have loads of people talking and we're not going to be able to see which questions you have. So let me just pop over to there. No public questions just yet, but that's fine. Let's just see, how is the... So, Milo, I don't know if you can see the polls, but I'll tell you the... So have you used CrowdSec and Pangolin together? It's a 50-50 split, 13 yes and 13 no. And then have you used Pangolin? There is 19 yes and 7 no's. So
we need to get the overlap to be 100%.
yeah, exactly. Yes, and love it. But yeah, so it's just interesting for us to see who attends these webinars, because like I said, we promoted it on both our platforms. So it's going to be a mixture of, CrowdSec only people and then Pangolin only people, or maybe you've got both, because like I said, it's in the installer. So let me just open to...
A couple questions in the question section, but I think these are CrowdSec questions. So Lawrence.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's just a question as what is the price of CrowdSec per month? Without the discount, it's $29 per slot. So this slot calculation confuses people, and we're working on improving the messaging around it. But a slot is basically a security engine. So for example, if you have one Pangolin instance and one security engine with that Pangolin instance, it's $29 per month. So with the 60% discount, it makes it $11.60 for your first month. Okay, and let me just click on this one. So what threats would CS protect us? OOTB out of the box. Yes, so by default, if you're using it with Pangolin, the installer installs the traffic collection and the virtual patching AppSec collection. So AppSec is our fancy naming scheme for WAF. So if you see anything about AppSec, it's a WAF, it's a web application firewall. So out of the box with Pangolin and CrowdSec, you get HTTP probing, you get brute force detection, and also you get our virtual patching rules, which are basically applied to CVE scenarios. So as an example, let's say if somebody uses a log4j attack on your system, even though log4j is definitely patched, hopefully it's patched, hopefully you managed to find time to patch in this last 4 years. But if you somehow didn't manage to find time to patch your stuff, then we would detect a log4j attack on your system. But these scenarios, especially the AppSec rules, are pretty much updated daily on the CrowdSec side. However, since CrowdSec is running inside a Docker container, there is no like system to automatically update your rules at the moment. So it will be best if you take some time to look at our Docker documentation to set up like a cron job to automatically update those rules. If not, you could just restart the container and it will automatically update the rules for you. So awesome.
Looks like it's not in the question section, but there was a question about Pangolin and IPv6. This comes up a lot. I know we don't have great support for it. I believe there's a feature request open. It is in our backlog, but our backlog is very long, so I can't say exactly when. But hopefully early next year.
Yeah. Well, if you're gonna dogpile on Pangolin for not supporting IPv6, then GitHub doesn't even support IPv6 yet. So $1 billion Microsoft doesn't care about IPv6 either.
Yeah. Yeah, multiple. All right. Any other questions that we missed?
I'm gonna be totally honest, and my screen is like one of those vertical screens, and the chat is like this big. So if you see me like getting really close and squinting, that's the reason why.
Let's see here.
Yeah, just don't know. Yeah, I know. Sometimes when I put my hands on the desk, it looks like an earthquake's happening with my camera. But it's not. It's just me just pushing on my flimsy desk, cheap desk from IKEA.
Are tenants available in Pangolin's Community Edition? Yes, they are. Yes.
You asked a question on the question tab. That is great. Let's have a look. If we use the free version of CrowdSec and we have a monthly alert quota exceeded, is it still blocking things right? Is just a web console that can't see it? Yes, exactly that. So if you use the free version of, the community edition of CrowdSec, the console will only display your first 500 alerts of the last 2 months. Once you've exceeded that quota, that is simply just a thing on the console that will not display the alert. The alert will still happen locally. So if you do set up any notifications or any automation systems with that thing, the console will not block you locally. It's just simply when you log into the console, you just won't be able to see past that thing. However, the remediation metrics is shown for the last 7 days. So if you go into the remediation metrics, you'll still be able to see what you have blocked for the last 7 days. You just won't be able to see the alerts past the first 500. Awesome. But also remember that the console is used for many different things. It's not just for alert quota stuff. We have integrations into additional block lists that we scrape ourselves. We have allow list support, so you can centralize all of your allow listing from there. Obviously, I know you have to do some allow listing on Pangolin side as well. So maybe in future we can consolidate that into one feasible system. But yeah, at the moment it would have to be on both sides.
There's a question about high availability for both Pangolin and CrowdSec. I can speak to the Pangolin side quickly, and then you can talk about CrowdSec. But so we do it on two sides. There's high availability on the server, like the ingress point, and there's high availability on the exit point, which is the exit of the tunnel, so NUT. You can run multiple Pangolin servers, and Right now, this is only available in Pangolin Cloud because we host the control plane, but you can fail over to one of the different servers if one is down. And then on the Newt side, this is available in all versions. You can run multiple Newts, and if expose resources, and you have a resource on different networks, and then a different Newt on each of those networks. And then if one of those resources goes down, it'll just route down the other Newt tunnel.
Cool. And then on the CrowdSec side, with the installer version that's included with Pangolin, it's just a simple fire and go container. There isn't HA built outside the box. So just a TLDR of how CrowdSec works is that it creates a SQL-like database on disk. That disk is persisted in a volume. And obviously, when it's inside a volume, you need some way to share that with something. So if you wanted the HA version of CrowdSec, you would have an external database like Postgres or MySQL or MariaDB. And then you can set up multiple LAPIs. So the LAPI is local API. And you would then feed them all into the same database instance. So then each one of the LAPIs knows about the same database context. And you would have to put a reverse proxy in front. And that reverse proxy is then in charge of the failover for the high availability of the LAPIs. I also did see another question about, I think the question is a little bit disjointed. So give me a sec. Is there a DNS only mode like in Cloudflare? I think they were asking about Pangolin, but I don't know if they mean that, because like in Cloudflare, they have like proxy mode, and proxies when obviously it goes through the network. And I think that's what they're asking about, the collaboration with CrowdSec. So technically not. As soon as you enable the integration with Pangolin and CrowdSec, the middleware is always there. The middleware is always on. You would have to have some ways to define either in like a middleware manager, a way to bypass certain rules depending on the request if you want to bypass CrowdSec middleware itself. And yeah, we still do have a bouncer inside Cloudflare. Don't get me started on Cloudflare because they were not the best to work with, but they are. But it's not their fault. It was just something that, like, they created some rate limiting on their API, but they refused to tell us what the rate limiting was because we could then game the system, and they refused to give us any headers back because then we would know how many requests that we could send in a certain time and game the system again, which obviously is not great for a developer experience. So yes, there is still 2 integrations into Cloudflare. One is for the lists, but we've been told by Cloudflare that lists were never designed to be dynamic and updated often. So we now have a worker component, which you should use instead. But yeah, that was the reason why we had to switch to a worker bouncer.
Regarding the uplink failover question, like how does Newt work with uplink failover? It's something it's actually a really interesting question because we haven't like explicitly tested it a ton. I know that there's a lot of situations in like edge IoT scenarios where there's different mobile uplinks and you can failover between them. I know we haven't had problems there. And I think the good thing about this is because Pangolin uses WireGuard under the hood. WireGuard's very stable, and basically, if you can run a WireGuard tunnel and that works fine, most likely Pangolin will work. Newt will work fine as well.
Yeah. Plus, also with WireGuard, you don't really have the TCP handshake when you're establishing the tunnel. It's just normally, obviously, UDP firing, and there's no like inspection. Because when I used to, back in my day, I use OpenVPN and stuff like that.
Oof,
you would have
yeah.
a lot of like problems where like the TCP, like it would just drop it, and then you like have to reestablish the connection. And that's why I use WireGuard for most of my own stuff now, because I like that it just connects to the tunnel, and then fire and forget. And if the thing's listening and it can decrypt the packet, then it will just work.
Yeah, I've used a bit of OpenVPN in my time as well, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But no, yes, WireGuard is a much better protocol.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I think we have a couple of more questions. We do. We have 2 more. With the free edition and Pangolin, can we add scenarios collections, or are we limited? No, you can add as many as you want. So if you go into the compose file, which is generated from what the Pangolin installer, you should be able to see a collections key. You basically just need to update that key to have which collections you want to install. Bring down your stack, bring it back up, and it will automatically install those scenarios. Just one thing to note, that when you get into the deeper the weeds of CrowdSec, there's two components when it comes to reading log sources or exposing some sort of way for CrowdSec to ingest things into its pipeline. So you have collections, which is like packages of parsers, scenarios, and rules. And then you have acquisitions. So acquisitions is like an index of telling CrowdSec where to go find the information that it needs to draw into its pipeline. So once you've got those two things on disk, I'm pretty sure Pangolin creates a mounted directory into an acquisition.d for the AppSec stuff. So if you find that same folder, you basically just need to generate a YAML file that has all the configuration that you need, but you should be able to find that on the docs.crowdsec.net. And in a home lab scenario, would Newt have to be isolated in some way? E.g., Newt is inside a Docker container, but needs to be restricted to whom it can talk to, e.g., a proxy in a home lab, or just rely on Pangolin and the traffic is secure. Sorry, I'm a beginner and beginner question.
Yeah, so the answer, I mean, you can if you want to. If you, there's no reason why you couldn't isolate it even more. But the beauty of Newt is it's deny all by default. So there are no routes set up. Nothing can get proxied out of the tunnel unless you go into the Pangolin dashboard and define resources and targets on those resources. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. Yeah, that's the beauty of it is we try to minimize the amount of work you have to do on the site where you install Newt.
Yeah, like you said, it's like you have to actually opt in to be able to give something to someone. You don't just, give access to the VPN or, the tunnel in this case, and it's not everyone gets access to everything by default.
Exactly, yeah.
Awesome. So we are way over, but we already knew that we were going to be way over anyways, because we already said that it's going to take like 30-40 minutes to do the stuff. So I'm just going to count down, well, not count down, but you know what I mean? I'm not going to be like 2 minutes, 1 minute 59, 1 minute 58. I mean, yeah, we've got 2 minutes left until the hour rolls up on us, so we'll call it at that time. So if you do have any more questions to ask them now, or we will, like I said, accumulate if you've got any like technical setup questions for stuff that you want to do with CrowdSec and Pangolin. We'll take them away and then come up with like a blog post or just a documentation, something for things that you want to do. Yeah, also it was my birthday yesterday, if you wasn't around. No, it wasn't yesterday, it was 2 days ago. You're saying belated like it was a day ago. God, I must have drank too much. Sorry.
Well, happy belated birthday.
Happy belated birthday, Yeah, and HFF messaged me and said like, oh, welcome if you come in your 30s. I was like, I'm already gone past my 30s. I'm heading all the way to 40s now. I'm an old man. Awesome. So yeah, we'll wrap it up now. So I'll close it off, and then thank you everyone for coming and spending your time here. And then if you're watching on the VOD, make sure you check out our next webinars live in person if you can make them. Cheers, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone.